What is up, everyone? And today I am looking at the very iconic Toy Story. Now, Toy Story is...
Considering you're talking about Toy Story, I'm just really curious. Which character do you like better, Woody or Buzz?
Oh, definitely Woody. Woody is by far my favorite character in that trilogy.
So you like Woody more than Buzz?
Buzz? And no.
Just you know why.
Just you know why.
Why you and I.
Why you and I.
Will.
Just you know why.
Why you
Buzz,
and I.
not a flying toy.
Will buy and buy.
Toy Story is released in 1995. It was directed by John Lasseter and stars Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. The film follows a specific toy named Woody, played by Tom Hanks. Woody belongs to a boy named Andy, and he's always been regarded as Andy's favorite toy. So Woody is a really nice and caring leader, however, who also loves the attention he gets with Andy. However, this new Buzz Lightyear, played by Tim Allen, comes into Andy's life, and now he begins to become Andy's favorite toy as opposed to Woody. Woody starts to get really jealous, and it leads to an epic buddy comedy, and one of the most iconic family films of all time. Not only that, but Toy Story became the highest grossing movie of 1995. The main thing I love about this movie is really just, it's a very fun movie. It's just a very fun, light-hearted, entertaining movie. This movie is incredibly entertaining. But it's not just fun entertainment. There are some elements in this movie that Pixar's become really popular about, especially in this area of time, and that is emotion. Introduced from Toy Story and following in other Pixar films, especially movies like Finding Nemo and Up and Inside Out, they don't just make fun, entertaining movies with really bright and colourful and really ridiculous premises. However, they also like to put in a lot of emotion into their films. And Pixar really often likes to try to get the audience to cry. And for a lot of people, they usually succeed. I absolutely love the scene where, minor spoilers, if you haven't seen this, over 20-year-old movie, but throughout the entire movie, Buzz is a brand new toy. You can tell he hasn't been out for very long, and he is convinced that he is the kind of toy he is. He's known as a Space Ranger, and throughout most of the movie, he is convinced that he's a Space Ranger. And so the film really relies on the comedy of this guy believing that he's a Space Ranger, and Woody doing everything he can to convince Buzz that he is not a Space Ranger and he is just a toy. Some of their arguments and their one-liners to each other throughout these arguments are hysterical. But I love the scene where Buzz eventually finds out for himself that Woody was right and he actually is just a toy. The scene where Buzz figures this out is really well done. Buzz is always thinking to himself, it can't be true, I must be a Space Ranger. And he eventually is determined to prove himself right when he is standing on that rail and he sees the window out in front of him. And he jumps and he looks like he's about to succeed. And in that moment, as he jumps and is halfway between the rail and the window, and then the film shifts into slow motion as he slowly begins to fall. You can see the look on his face, and I love how Pixar slowed this moment down because it allows the audience to really sink in this moment as Buzz really comes to the shock as he slowly begins to fall that he is right and he is just a toy and he actually can't fly. And as he falls, you can really see the despair on his face, and he's despaired for, well, A, he's about to smash right into the ground and he's about to have a massive fall, and he's also having such an impactful fall, and so it's a very big emotional scene physically but also mentally because he's just come to the realization that he is just a toy and he can't fly. And while his delusional behaviour about thinking that he's a Space Ranger throughout most of the film is really played for comedy, however, when it comes to this one moment where he realizes it's true, it's heartbreaking. And I will not lie, I will confess that one time, not the time when I watched it again for the sake of this review, but I watched this movie a few years ago, and I will not lie, this scene actually made me cry. And considering I almost never cry in movies, that is a huge accomplishment. And to really add to that scene is Randy Newman's excellent score. It's a really heartbreaking scene, and even though it did make me cry this time, I definitely felt really emotional. I also love the scene where Woody and Buzz finally talking to each other instead of just arguing or having stupid bickers or just arguing to each other about whether or not he's a space ranger or any of that stuff. But for the first time, I absolutely love the scene where they finally decide to have a proper conversation after Buzz realizes the truth. And this conversation is really, really well executed, not just because of the excellent dialogue, but also because of the excellent cinematography. And the way the cinematography was done in this very specific scene is very glossed over by a lot of critics, but don't worry, I'm going to address it myself. One thing I loved about this scene is that at first, Buzz is really depressed and really grieving about the fact that he can't fly, and he feels like that he is now useless and he can't save lives, which is a really depressing idea when you really think about it. So now Buzz is all depressed and upset, and Woody is really trying everything he can to try and cheer Buzz up and tell him that being a toy is just as great, if not better. At first, the conversation between the two is really, really depressing, and to really illustrate this visually, it's raining outside and the colour is really blue-greyish, and it's just a really unpleasant, really miserable feeling, and you really feel that kind of depression that Buzz Lightyear is going through. At first, it's really miserable colours, and it's a very depressing conversation at first. However, since it's a very serious and very heartfelt conversation, this is the first time they've actually socially had a proper conversation. At first, it's very miserable, however, as the scene progresses, the rain slowly stops, and the colour starts to more saturate and go from being blue and greyish to having more warmer colours. And by the end of the scene, it's bright and sunny outside, the rain has stopped, and they're using much more warmer colours. And this is something that fades very, very gradually throughout the scene. And it's very subtle, but it's very, very effective. This was brilliant filmmaking, and this is little filmmaking tidbits that I love spotting in movies. But this just goes to show how effective color grading and color correction can be if you implement it correctly into the films. Okay, don't worry, I'm not going to be as technical throughout the rest of the review, I promise. I also think that the climax is really, really fun. I love the climax for this movie. It's really fun, it's really creative, and it's just incredibly entertaining. And not to mention the main two characters are brilliant. Woody and Buzz, these are great characters. Tim Allen and Tom Hanks have really, really great chemistry. The chemistry between Woody and Buzz in this movie are really good. They are fantastic together. I really do love how when the chemistry between the two main characters really, really work, because it really adds to the film. The main reason why you remember Toy Story is because you remember Woody and Buzz. They have really bright and colourful personalities. The writing is great and the acting is great. These are just great characters. And since that this is a movie about toys coming to life, this movie has a great sense of humour. It's really funny. Of course, you have your typical toy puns, and then you have your really, really clever writing, and then you have your innuendos that only your teens and adults are going to get, and trust me, those are hilarious. If you get these adult innuendos, you will laugh. And then you have your references, and what I mean by references is that there's actually quite a few blockbuster movie references. I won't give any away, just so you can go and watch the film yourself again and see if you can spot them, but I guarantee you that I have spotted a reference to Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Back to the Future, and they even used the infamous Wilhelm scream. Yes guys, there is a Back to the Future reference in this movie. I dare you to see if you can find it. If you can find it, please tell me in the comments, because I guarantee you there is one in there. I'm just not going to spoil it. It's also pretty subtle too, but I want to see if any one of you can get it in the comments, because trust me, it's in there. I also love how every character has become iconic in a way, and the main reason is not only are they just so entertaining and lovable, but they also have really identifiable goals and personalities and motivation. Woody wants to sort of push Buzz out of the picture for a little bit because Woody likes the attention that Andy's getting. And so that's what drives Woody forward. And since Woody is Andy's favourite when he eventually gets lost, his main goal is just to get back to Andy. Buzz's main goal is that he thinks he's a space ranger, so his entire goal is to get back to his home planet that doesn't actually exist. And these characters really add to the main reason why I love the climax of this movie so much. When they eventually have had their little heartfelt conversation, they've officially made up and become great friends. I love how they are giving little sacrifices to each other, so they sacrifice themselves every so often to really help each other. And considering they keep on giving little sacrifices to help the other, it really gives a really great sense of teamwork, and it really feels like that Woody and Buzz are both working together to get back to Andy. One example I have for a sacrifice is that Woody is holding onto the back of the truck/van that Andy is about to take off in. However, Buzz can't catch up to Woody because the rocket that's strapped to his back is getting caught and stuck at the fence. And the van is just about to take off, so Woody has this little decision whether he can stay on the car and take off, or jump off the car and help Buzz. And he ultimately decides to jump off the car and sacrifice and let the car go, and then take Buzz off. He jumps off the van and helps Buzz, and then the van just leaves off without him, and so they have to go chase after the truck. And they both do that to each other throughout the entire climax, and it really adds and really gives this feel of teamwork, and it feels like they are truly working together as new friends. And also, for a G-rated film, now I'm not saying that I think this movie is PG. This movie is perfectly fine to be a G. It should be a G. But I think it's funny because there are a couple of somewhat brutal moments. Like, there are times where people get a bit violent, like Woody and Buzz start physically punching each other, or this. Okay, that doesn't actually happen, but damn, that is not the way you would want to end a Pixar movie, would it? On the technical side of things, in some aspects, I think that the CG of the movie has held up pretty well. But only some aspects. Now, I know that we all make fun of the fact that the humans look more plastic than the toys do, but I have more other nitpicks to the animation that I don't feel like a lot of people are really talking about. For starters, my main issue with the humans is not necessarily that they look more plastic than the toys, but more I just feel like that their faces are really proportioned in really weird ways. Like their forehead and their eye bits are much larger than their mouth and chin bits, and it looks really disordered and looks really weird. They don't look like humans. They look more like aliens trying to imitate humans. They just look, the faces are really weirdly proportioned. Which is all the more weird because they got the rest of their bodies perfectly right. I've noticed that Pixar tried their hardest to avoid showing faces as much as possible in this movie, and I can see why. There are also some slight technical glitches. Now, I hope I'm not the only one who's noticed this, but I don't see anyone else talk about it, and I don't think even CinemaSins spoke upon this. However, you know that iconic moment in the movie where Buzz meets Woody for the first time, he's startled, and then starts firing his laser at Woody and it doesn't work? However, I feel like that the laser shouldn't even go off in the first place because if you look closely, you'll notice that Buzz isn't even touching the button. He's sort of either behind or in front of the button, and he's not actually touching the button. And yet, it's still going. Now, I can sort of suspend my disbelief when he doesn't even need to try and do that, he just fires out his arm, but when he's actually trying to push the button, he's not actually touching the button, and it just looks a bit weird. Seriously, am I seriously the only person who noticed that? Also, the character animation has been slightly dated. Pixar was really new to this CG animation process, and it kind of shows. The animations are quite good, and they're very wild and very expressive, and they're very creative. Like, it's done well. However, the way the characters move, it looks a bit more unnatural. Like, I can feel like I can see where Pixar implemented the command to get their models to do whatever they wanted their models to do. Like, it feels a lot more animatronic, and they look more like machines than they do look like living things. It's really hard to explain without really showing you what I mean, but mainly what I mean is that the toys just sort of look more animatronic. They don't move very naturally. But I'm not saying that this is a terrible looking movie. In fact, I think that considering that this came out in 1995, I think it's held up surprisingly well. It looks a lot better than the CGI used in Jumanji, that's for sure. Again, the toys themselves are actually animated really, really well. I love their design, and their models and everything are really well proportioned. You can tell that they're very expressive, and like, it's well animated, there's still lots of attention to detail. So I do think it's really good animation, and that's really expected from Pixar. I just think that considering that this movie's over 20 years old, I think that there are some areas where they could have improved upon. But despite the slightly dated CG, which I can excuse for being over 20 years old, I don't have any other flaws with this movie. And even though it is a pretty major flaw in my opinion, It's just the animation, and I'm glad that they put more effort in the story and characters than the animation. I still think it's one of the best animated movies I've ever seen in my life, and since it's one of the best, despite the flaw, I still can't resist giving Toy Story an A+. For those who don't know what I'm doing, I'm actually reviewing Toy Story because I want to have a Pixar marathon, and I want to review every single Pixar movie ever made in chronological order of release. So, stay tuned for my next review in this marathon where I review A Bug's Life. Hasta la vista, baby.